Historically, society didn't really distinguish between sex and gender. They were treated as the same thing and always as binary, male or female. This thinking didn't leave room for alternative identities or roles. People were expected to follow traditional patterns. Women stayed home and cared for children. Men worked outside the home and made decisions. While we've made some progress, like more women working and more men caregiving, inequality still exists. A clear example is the gender pay gap, which continues to show that women earn less than men overall. Part of the problem is our tendency in Western society to label people in rigid, binary terms, male or female, masculine or feminine, gay or straight. Anyone who doesn't fit neatly into those categories often faces unfair treatment, judgment, or exclusion. But these binary categories aren't universal. For example, many Native North American cultures recognize two-spirit individuals as a distinct and respected gender identity. In Papua New Guinea, the Sambia tribe includes same-sex sexual behavior in male initiation rituals, and they don't categorize this behavior with the same labels or stigma we often see in the West. All these examples show that what we think of as normal is often shaped by culture. As we move through this chapter, we'll explore the differences between sex, gender, and sexuality, and look at how gender roles are socially constructed. We'll also question these binary divisions and examine how they affect those who live outside of them. To understand gender as a social construct, we first need to separate it from sex. Sex refers to our biological makeup, things like DNA, hormones, reproductive organs, and physical traits like hair growth or muscle mass. We often think of sex as strictly male or female, but biology actually exists along a spectrum, with variations in chromosomes and anatomy that don't fit neatly into one category. Gender, on the other hand, is not biological. It's a social construct. It refers to the roles, attitudes, and behaviors that society associates with being male or female. Traditionally, this meant men were seen as strong, aggressive protectors, and women were expected to be gentle, nurturing, and passive. These stereotypes were deeply embedded in our culture and still shape expectations today. Our understanding of gender includes both gender identity, how someone internally perceives and labels their own gender, and gender expression, which is how they outwardly present it through clothing, behavior, or speech. While these used to be seen as strictly masculine or feminine, we now recognize a much wider range of identities and expressions. But our culture hasn't always made room for this diversity. Like sex and gender, sexuality in North America has also been seen in binary terms, gay or straight, leaving little space for people who don't fit those categories. Cross-cultural examples help challenge these rigid binaries. In the Arapesh culture of New Guinea, both men and women are expected to be nurturing and gentle, while the Mundugamor expect both to be aggressive. Neither society divides gender roles the way we typically do in North America. These examples show that what we think of as masculine or feminine is not universal. It varies across cultures and even changes over time. Even within Canadian society, gender roles have shifted. Tasks like child rearing, once seen as strictly a woman's job, are now more evenly shared, with many men becoming primary caregivers. Meanwhile, more women are working outside the home than ever before. So the question becomes, how are our ideas about gender formed? Where do they come from, and how do they shape our behavior and expectations? That's what we'll look at next as we explore gender socialization in more detail. Children start picking up on gender differences surprisingly early. By the time they're 2, they can already tell the difference between boys and girls. But at that age, their understanding of gender is still pretty flexible. They often rely on things like clothing or hair to decide someone's gender. So if a child with long hair wears a pink dress, they might say girl. But put the same kid in jeans and a blue hoodie, and suddenly they might say boy. They haven't yet linked gender to biology the way adults do. By around ages 3 to 5, though, they start thinking of gender as more permanent, often connecting it to body parts or what they've been taught by adults. At this point, you'll see more gender-typical behavior, like kids preferring toys or friends that align with their own gender. This whole process, learning what it means to be a boy or a girl, is called gender socialization. And it happens through key influences: parents, teachers, peers, and the media. Parents are usually the first big influence. From the clothes they buy to chores they assign, they often treat boys and girls differently, sometimes without even realizing it. These early choices send clear messages about what's considered appropriate for each gender. Then we have schools, where gender expectations get reinforced, often unintentionally. Teachers may have different expectations for boys and girls, or group kids by gender. Even classroom activities can reflect gender norms. And peers add another layer. Children tend to play with others of the same gender and may tease or exclude those who don't conform. Media is a huge influence too. Whether it's TV shows, books, ads, or social media, we're constantly exposed to ideas about what boys and girls should be like. These messages usually stick to the same old stereotypes: strong, stoic men and caring, pretty women. And while we know that masculinity and femininity aren't universal, media often presents them as fixed and absolute. But the truth is, there's a wide range of what masculinity and femininity can look like. These ideas change across cultures, over time, and even from person to person. Plus, gender doesn't exist in isolation. It intersects with things like race, class, religion, and sexuality. That means everyone's experience with gender is unique. In Canada, we still tend to hold up certain ideal versions of masculinity and femininity, what real man or proper woman is supposed to be. These ideals are powerful, but also unrealistic. They shape how we view ourselves and others, often in ways that limit us. So as we keep exploring this topic, we'll dig into how these dominant norms are taught, reinforced, and sometimes challenged in everyday life. Let's look at how society defines the ideal man and woman. Hegemonic masculinity is the version of manhood that's held up as the standard. It's all about toughness, emotional control, aggression, and heterosexuality. There's pressure for men to act a certain way: never cry, always be strong, compete, dominate, and never show weakness. This isn't just about being different from women. It's also about being better than other men who don't live up to these traits. On the other side, we have emphasized femininity, the ideal for women that's all about being nurturing, emotional, and attractive. Women are often expected to be passive, dependent, and focused on looking perfect. This ideal supports male dominance by encouraging women to fit into roles that benefit men. These ideas are taught early. You can see them in toy aisles: pink and nurturing toys for girls, action and building toys for boys. Girls are encouraged to care for others and look good. Boys are told to act, fight, and lead. Even efforts to make things more equal, like marketing science toys in pink, can reinforce the idea that girls need something different just to participate. Advertising also plays a huge role. Women are shown as flawless, sexualized, and often reduced to body parts. These images teach girls that beauty is their main value and encourage unhealthy attitudes toward their bodies. Meanwhile, men are increasingly portrayed as aggressive and dominant, which reinforces the idea that violence is a natural part of masculinity. The problem is, very few people actually match these ideals. They're unrealistic, but still powerful. Those who don't fit, men who are sensitive, women who don't focus on beauty, are often judged or excluded. These ideals don't just shape individuals, they shape society, limiting how we express ourselves and relate to each other. So the big question is, who's reinforcing these roles and what can we do to challenge them, especially when they cause harm to both men and women? Gender inequality is deeply rooted in how our society is structured, especially through the old binary of male-female, masculine-feminine, and straight-gay. Most societies, including Canada, have been shaped by patriarchy, where men hold more power. We see the impact of that when we look at who has access to education, jobs, and leadership positions, and how much they're paid. In education, things have shifted over the past few decades. More women than men now earn university degrees, and that trend is expected to continue. But there are still gaps. Women are less likely to finish trades programs and are underrepresented in STEM fields. Surprisingly, even girls who are strong in math often avoid those fields, which raises questions about lingering stereotypes. In employment, the gender gap has narrowed, but differences still exist. Women are much more likely to work part-time, often by choice so they can care for children. Men, by contrast, usually work part-time only when they can't find full-time jobs. Women are concentrated in caregiving sectors like healthcare and education, while men dominate in industries like construction and mining. Even in industries where women are the majority, they often hold lower level positions. For example, most kitchen support staff are women, but more chefs are men. Leadership roles also show a divide. Women hold fewer senior private sector jobs, though public sector roles are more balanced, possibly due to employment equity policies in some provinces. Then there's the pay gap. On average, women earn less than men, about 74 cents on the dollar annually, or 88 cents when you compare hourly wages. This gap reflects not just hours worked, but also job types and systemic barriers to advancement. Location matters too. Cities in Quebec tend to have smaller gender gaps, likely thanks to things like subsidized childcare and better parental leave policies. On the flip side, cities that rely on male-dominated industries like Calgary or Kitchener tend to show wider gaps. Victoria, BC, stands out as the best city for women, partly because of a strong public sector that supports more equitable hiring and promotions. So even with progress, gender inequality is still embedded in how we educate, employ, and compensate people, and those patterns are shaped by both history and policy. Gender-based violence is still a serious issue in Canada. Women are more likely than men to experience intimate partner violence, spousal abuse, and sexual assault. And those are just the cases we know about. Many incidents go unreported because of fear, shame, or stigma. We saw just how widespread this issue is when the hashtag #BeenRapedNeverReported went viral, with millions of people sharing their stories. One major reason this violence continues is how society defines masculinity. When toughness, control, and dominance are seen as core parts of being a man, it creates a culture where violence is more likely. This isn't about biology, it's about how masculinity is taught and reinforced in unstable or unequal social environments. Another issue is how we talk about violence. When we call it a women's issue, it can let men off the hook and keep them from engaging. But violence doesn't happen in a vacuum. Men are part of the system, and many are affected by it, either as perpetrators, victims, or bystanders. That's why shifting the language to call it a men's issue can make a real difference. It brings men into the conversation and helps challenge the power structures that allow this kind of violence to continue. Several campaigns are working to change this narrative. He for She encourages men in leadership to commit to gender equity. Walk a Mile in Her Shoes invites men to literally walk in women's shoes to raise awareness about violence. And the White Ribbon campaign challenges men and boys to pledge never to commit or ignore violence against women. These movements aim to reshape how we think about masculinity, not as something rooted in dominance, but as a force for positive change. As we continue to address gender-based violence, it's clear we need more men involved, not just in recognizing the issue, but in actively working to change the culture that fuels it. Let's now move beyond binary thinking when it comes to sex, gender, and sexuality. Most of us have been taught that people are either male or female, masculine or feminine, gay or straight, but this way of thinking is extremely limiting. Instead, think of gender as individual and multidimensional. A helpful way to understand this is through the NEST model, which breaks gender down into separate areas: biological sex, gender identity, gender expression, and attraction. These areas are interrelated, but they don't determine one another. You can be born with male anatomy, identify as a woman, express yourself in a mix of masculine and feminine ways, and be attracted to any gender, or none at all. This model moves beyond spectrums that put man on one end and woman on the other. Instead, it shows that people can be a lot of both, or neither. There's no fixed point you have to land on. For example, someone might feel strong ties to both womanness and manness, or feel little connection to either. This includes identities like genderqueer, non-binary, agender, and more. When it comes to gender expression, the model includes everything from traditional expressions to more fluid or non-traditional ones. Some people may present in ways that match social expectations, while others push back against them through androgyny, drag, or gender nonconforming styles. These expressions can reflect identity, challenge norms, or simply feel right to the individual. They also shape how others treat us based on assumptions about who we are. Biological sex, often used to justify rigid gender roles, is far more complex than we're usually told. It involves hormones, chromosomes, anatomy, and more, and there's variation in all of these. Not everyone fits neatly into male or female, and about 1 in 100 people are born with intersex traits that don't align clearly with either category. This challenges the idea that biology determines gender or identity. Finally, attraction, both sexual and romantic, is its own dimension. It's not just about who we are, it's also about who we're drawn to and in what ways. Some people experience attraction to masculinity, femininity, certain traits, or none at all. The model recognizes that attraction is deeply personal and shaped by both biology and social experience. So what this all points to is a bigger truth. Gender and sexuality aren't about fitting into categories. They're about human experience. We don't have to be either or. We can be both and, or something entirely different. The goal isn't to prescribe how people should identify, but to open up space for people to be who they are, without assumptions.